The old stagecoach wheels creaked and groaned against the rough mountain trail as it made its final descent into Silverdale. Dust billowed around the weathered vehicle, catching the late afternoon sunlight in a golden haze that momentarily transformed the humble mining town into something almost magical. For a fleeting second, it looked like the answer to prayers whispered over many sleepless nights. The mirage quickly faded as the coach rumbled closer, revealing a collection of weather-beaten buildings clinging to the Montana hillside like survivors of nature's constant assault. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Margaret Collins clutched her daughter's hand as the stagecoach finally rolled to a stop in front of Silverdale's only hotel. Her fingers ached from the journey, joints stiff from holding too tightly to both her child and her hopes. At 32, Maggie was not young by frontier standards. Her chestnut hair already threaded with silver strands that she'd stopped trying to hide. Life had etched fine lines around her eyes, not from laughter, but from squinting against harsh realities that had buffeted her like prairie winds. Beside her, 10-year-old Charlotte, Lottie as she preferred, sat with uncommon stillness. Her copper hair was braided neatly, though wisps had escaped during the long journey to frame a face dusted with freckles and dominated by serious green eyes. Those eyes had seen too much for a child her age, had watched her father waste away. From consumption, had witnessed their Boston home and belongings sold to pay debts. They had watched her mother write letter after letter by candlelight, seeking a future in a place they'd never been. "Is this it, Mama?" Lottie whispered, peering through the dust-caked window at the town that was to be their salvation. Her voice carried no judgment, merely curiosity and perhaps a wariness beyond her years. Maggie smoothed her daughter's wayward curls and offered a smile that felt brittle on her lips. "Yes, darling, this is Silverdale." She straightened her back, adjusting the threadbare cuffs of her once fine traveling dress. "Mr. Turner's ranch is just outside of town. We'll meet him tomorrow." Their fellow passengers, a traveling salesman and an elderly couple returning from visiting relatives, disembarked first. The driver, a weathered man with leathery skin and surprisingly gentle manners, helped Maggie and Lottie down, handling their single trunk with care that brought unexpected tears to Maggie's eyes. Small kindnesses had become precious rarities. "Wilson's boarding house is just down the street," the driver said, nodding toward a two-story structure with a wide porch and faded white paint. "Mrs. Wilson runs a clean place. Tell her Hank sent. You might get you a better room." Maggie thanked him with genuine warmth. They made their way down the dusty main street, Lottie's curious gaze taking in everything: the saloon with its swinging doors, the general mercantile with rocking chairs on the porch, the small church whose white steeple reached hopefully skyward. Folks paused in their evening routines to study the newcomers, their gazes lingering on Maggie's worn but clearly once expensive clothes, on Lottie's copper braids, on the single trunk that contained all that remained of their former life. Mrs. Dorothy Wilson met them at the door of the boarding house before they'd even climbed the steps. She was a tall, angular woman with steel-gray hair pulled back so severely it seemed to stretch the skin of her face taut. Her apron was spotless despite the hour, her hands red from lye soap and hot water. "You'll be Mrs. Collins," she said. Not a question, but a statement of fact. At Maggie's surprise, she added, "Mr. Turner sent word to expect you, said to put you up for the night, that he'd be by in the morning." Her gaze fell on Lottie, one eyebrow arching slightly. "Didn't mention a child." Maggie's spine stiffened. "My daughter was mentioned in my letters. Charlotte is very well behaved and won't be any trouble." Mrs. Wilson's expression didn't change, but she stepped aside to let them enter. "Rooms upstairs, last door on the left. Supper's at 6 sharp. Don't be late. Food gets cold and I don't serve twice. The room was small but, as Hank had promised, clean. A narrow bed with an iron frame dominated the space, its quilt faded but meticulously stitched, a washstand with a cracked basin, a small chest of drawers, and a chair by the window completed the furnishings. Lottie immediately went to the window, pressing her nose to the glass to look out over Silverdale's main street. "It's so different from Boston," she murmured. Maggie set their trunk at the foot of the bed and sat down, allowing herself a moment of bone-deep weariness. "Yes, it is. But different might be exactly what we need." She reached into her bodice and withdrew a letter, its creases soft from countless readings. Franklin Turner's neat, precise handwriting requested a woman of good character and practical skills to be his wife, promised a comfortable home on a prosperous ranch, and spoke of his desire for companionship in his middle years. What it didn't mention was children, but Maggie had been explicit about Lottie in her response. Surely he understood they came as a pair. Supper at Mrs. Wilson's long oak table was a quiet affair. The other boarders, two miners, a clerk from the bank, and a seamstress, regarded the newcomers with curious glances but little conversation. The food was simple but plentiful: beef stew, cornbread, and stewed apples. Lottie ate with careful manners that made Maggie's heart swell with pride and ache with memory. They'd known better times, when their table had been set with fine china and their future had seemed secure. After supper, as Lottie prepared for bed, Maggie sat in the straight-back chair by the window, watching night settle over Silverdale. Lanterns glowed in windows, casting warm rectangles of light onto the darkening street. From the saloon came muffled piano music and occasional bursts of laughter. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. "Do you think Mr. Turner will like us?" Lottie asked, her voice small in the dimness. Maggie turned to her daughter, now a slender shape beneath the quilt. "What's not to like?" she answered, keeping her tone light. "Now sleep, my love. Tomorrow is a new beginning." Yet as Lottie's breathing slowed into sleep, Maggie returned her gaze to the darkened town. New beginnings. She'd had too many of those already, each born from an ending she hadn't chosen. Her husband's death, the loss of their home, the reluctant farewell to friends and family as she and Lottie boarded the train westward. She touched the simple gold band she still wore, a talisman of a happier time. "Please," she whispered to the stars scattered like silver coins across the Montana sky, "let this one last." Morning arrived with crystalline clarity. The mountain, air so sharp and clean it almost hurt to breathe. Maggie woke early, washing in the cold water from the pitcher before carefully dressing in her best remaining outfit, a navy blue dress with only one nearly invisible mend at the seam. She arranged her hair in a simple but elegant knot, pinning it securely before waking Lottie. "Today we meet Mr. Turner," she said, helping her daughter into her second-best dress, a green cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. "Remember what we talked about, proper manners, speak when spoken to, and smile," Lottie finished for her, a dimple appearing in one cheek as she demonstrated. "I know, Mama." Breakfast was hearty. Flapjacks with molasses, thick slices of bacon, strong coffee for the adults, and milk for Lottie. Mrs. Wilson moved efficiently around the table, refilling cups, her expression unchanging but her eyes missing nothing. When the front door opened, sending a shaft of morning sunlight across the plank floor, she straightened, smoothing her apron. "Mr. Turner," she said with a nod of acknowledgement. Maggie turned, her heart suddenly a trapped bird in her chest. Franklin Turner filled the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, in a well-tailored suit that spoke of prosperity. His hair was dark beneath his hat, touched with silver at the temples, his face handsome in a conventional way, with a strong jaw and straight nose. He removed his hat as he entered, revealing brilliantined hair parted severely on one side. His eyes, a pale blue that reminded Maggie of winter sky, swept the room before settling on her. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Maggie rose. Smoothing her skirts with hands, she willed not to tremble. Mr. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Turner, she said, her voice steady despite the nervousness fluttering in her stomach. I'm Margaret Collins. It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Turner approached with measured steps, his gaze assessing her with the cool appraisal of a man accustomed to evaluating livestock. Mrs. Collins, he said, his voice as precise as his handwriting. He didn't take her offered hand. The omission sent a chill through Maggie, but she maintained her smile. And this is my daughter, Charlotte. Lottie stood and executed a perfect, small curtsy, just as they'd practiced. Very pleased to meet you, sir, she said, her voice clear and sweet. Turner's gaze shifted to the child, his expression hardening almost imperceptibly. The slight tightening around his mouth might have been missed by someone less attuned to the nuances of disapproval, but Maggie had learned to read such signs. During the long months after her husband's death, when former friends had gradually withdrawn their support. I wasn't expecting a child, Turner said flatly. The room went silent. Mrs. Wilson busied herself with the coffee pot, the other boarders suddenly very interested in their breakfast. Maggie felt heat rise to her cheeks. I mentioned Charlotte in my letters, she said, keeping her voice low. I was very clear that we come together. Turner's mouth thinned further. Perhaps you did. I receive a great deal of correspondence regarding ranch business and may have overlooked that detail. His gaze traveled from Lottie's copper head to Maggie's face, assessing, calculating. Mrs. Collins, might I speak with you privately? They stepped onto the boarding house porch, the morning sun already warming the weathered boards. Maggie clasped her hands tightly before her, determined to maintain her composure no matter what came next. Mrs. Collins, Turner began, his tone businesslike. I require a wife to manage my household and provide companionship. My ranch is not a suitable place for a child. There are dangers. Charlotte is well behaved and adaptable, Maggie interrupted, desperation edging into her voice despite her best efforts. She's not afraid of hard work. She can help with household duties, even learn to cook. That is not the issue. Turner cut her off with a sharp gesture. My household is organized precisely as I wish it. A child would disrupt that order. Furthermore, my previous inquiry suggested you were younger, without encumbrances. No. The word encumbrances struck Maggie like a physical blow. Lottie, her beautiful, brave daughter, reduced to an inconvenience, a burden. I was completely forthright in my letters, Maggie said, fighting to keep her voice steady. I never misrepresented either my age or my circumstances. Turner sighed, a sound of impatience rather than regret. Regardless, this arrangement will not suit. I'm afraid I must withdraw my offer. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small envelope. This should cover your return journey. Mrs. Wilson has been paid for 2 more nights. With that, he replaced his hat, nodded curtly, and descended the steps to where a gleaming buggy waited, its black horse stamping impatiently. Within moments, he was gone in a cloud of dust, leaving Maggie standing alone on the porch, the envelope clutched in numb fingers. She didn't know how long she stood there, the morning sun climbing higher, warming her shoulders through the fabric of her dress. The sound of the boarding house door opening finally broke her trance. Mama! Lottie's voice was small, uncertain. Is everything all right? Maggie turned to her daughter, quickly tucking the envelope into her pocket. Of course, darling. she said, summoning a smile that felt like glass on her lips. "Mr. Turner has some business to attend to. We'll talk later." But there was no hiding the truth from Mrs. Wilson, whose knowing gaze followed them as they re-entered the dining room. The other boarders had gone, leaving only empty plates and cooling coffee cups. "He's not coming back, is he?" Mrs. Wilson said bluntly, once Lottie had gone upstairs to fetch her storybook. Maggie's shoulders sagged. "No," the older woman snorted softly. "Franklin Turner's a man who likes everything just so. Been through 3 housekeepers in the past year because none could polish the silver to his satisfaction." She picked up a plate, her movements brisk but not unkind. "If you ask me, you're better off. That man would have had you walking on eggshells in your own home." "Perhaps," Maggie replied, "but now we have nowhere to go." She touched her pocket where Turner's envelope sat like a stone. "And not enough money to return east." Mrs. Wilson regarded her thoughtfully. "You any good with figures?" Startled by the unexpected question, Maggie nodded. "Yes, quite good, actually. My husband was an accountant. I often helped him with his books." Mrs. Wilson stacked plates with the efficiency of long practice. "Samuel Graves over at the Mercantile mentioned needing help with his accounts. His eyes aren't what they used to be for small print." Hope, tiny but persistent, flickered in Maggie's chest. "Do you think he would?" "Can't hurt to ask," Mrs. Wilson replied with a shrug. "Town's growing. Might be other opportunities too, if you're not too proud to work." Pride was a luxury Maggie had set aside long ago, somewhere between selling her mother's silver and packing their life into a single trunk. "I'm not too proud," she said quietly. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson." "Dorothy," the older woman corrected, her stern features softening slightly. "Been a long time since anyone called me anything but Mrs. Wilson or that battle axe who runs the boarding house." Maggie smiled, a genuine one this time. "Thank you, Dorothy." The morning stretched toward noon as Maggie considered her options. The envelope in her pocket contained enough for perhaps 1 stagecoach ticket back east, not 2, and what awaited them there? No home, no family willing or able to take them in. Here, at least, they had a lead on possible work. "Come, Lottie," she said finally, decision made. "Let's see if Mr. Graves at the Mercantile needs any help with his bookkeeping." Graves' General Mercantile sat in the heart of Silverdale, its wide porch furnished with rocking chairs where old-timers sat sharing stories and watching the town's comings and goings. The bell above the door jingled merrily as Maggie and Lottie entered, announcing their arrival to the tall, thin man behind the counter. Samuel Graves peered at them over wire-rimmed spectacles, his white beard neatly trimmed, his shirt sleeves secured with sleeve garters. "Good day, ladies," he greeted them, his voice warm and surprisingly deep. "What can I help you find today?" "Actually, Mr. Graves," Maggie began, suddenly nervous, "Mrs. Wilson, Dorothy, mentioned you might need help with your accounts. I'm quite experienced with bookkeeping." Graves studied her for a moment, his gaze keen despite his allegedly failing eyesight. "You'd be Mrs. Collins, I take it, Franklin Turner's mail-order bride." The description stung, but Maggie acknowledged it with a nod. "Word travels fast in Silverdale," Graves said, not unkindly, "especially when it involves Franklin Turner changing his mind about something." He gestured toward a young clerk who was stocking shelves. "Ben, mind the counter for a bit." The young man, hardly more than a boy really, nodded eagerly. "Come to the back office," Graves invited, lifting a section of the counter to let them through. The office was small but orderly, dominated by a roll-top desk covered with ledgers and invoices. Graves settled into the creaking chair behind it, gesturing for Maggie and Lottie to take the 2 simpler chairs opposite. "It's true my eyes aren't what they used to be for small figures," he admitted, "and business has picked up since the new silver vein was discovered last spring. Hard to keep everything straight." He pushed a ledger toward her. "Show me what." you can do with this." For the next half hour, Maggie demonstrated her skill with numbers, quickly identifying discrepancies in the columns and suggesting a more efficient system for tracking inventory. Lottie sat quietly, reading a book from Graves's small shelf, occasionally glancing up to watch her mother with undisguised pride. When Maggie finished, Graves leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled before him. "Well, Mrs. Collins, you certainly know your way around a ledger." He named a modest weekly sum. "It's not much, but it would include room and board for you, and your daughter, if you're willing to live above the store." Previous clerk used the rooms before he moved on to Helena. Relief washed over Maggie like a physical wave. "That would be most generous, Mr. Graves. We accept gratefully." As they walked back to the boarding house to collect their trunk, Silverdale looked different somehow. The dusty street, the weathered buildings, the distant mountains, all seemed less forbidding, more like a canvas awaiting their story, rather than a harsh landscape ready to reject them. "Does this mean we're staying, Mama?" Lottie asked, skipping slightly beside her, youthful resilience already helping her bounce back from the morning's disappointment. "Yes, my love," Maggie answered, squeezing her daughter's hand. "It appears we are." Word of their change in circumstances spread through Silverdale with the speed of summer lightning. By evening, it seemed everyone knew that Franklin Turner's mail-order bride had been rejected, but had found work at Graves Mercantile instead. Some, like Dorothy Wilson, nodded with approval at Maggie's refusal to slink away in shame. Others, particularly the society ladies who orbited around Turner's wealth and position, whispered behind gloved hands when Maggie and Lottie passed on the boardwalk. Chief among these was Victoria Pendleton, whose elaborately curled blonde hair and fashionable dresses announced her self-appointed role as Silverdale's arbiter of propriety. She made a point of visiting the Mercantile the very next day, her gaze sweeping dismissively over Maggie as she requested finest rice paper for correspondence. "The kind Mr. Turner prefers for his letters," she added with pointed emphasis. Maggie maintained her composure, wrapping the paper with precise movements and accepting Victoria's payment with a polite smile that never reached her eyes. Only after the woman had departed in a cloud of expensive perfume did Maggie allow her shoulders to sag slightly. "Don't mind Victoria Pendleton," Samuel Graves said from behind her. "She's been trying to catch Franklin Turner's eye for years, takes it as a personal insult every time he looks elsewhere." "I'm hardly competition now," Maggie pointed out. Graves chuckled, a warm, rumbling sound. "No, but you're a reminder that he was willing to send all the way to Boston rather than choose her. That's a wound to her pride that won't heal quickly." The rooms above the Mercantile were larger than Maggie had dared hope. A sitting room with a small stove, a bedroom large enough for the bed she and Lottie would share, and a tiny kitchen with a pump that delivered cold, clear water right inside. After months of boarding houses and cheap hotels, it felt like luxury. That evening, as she tucked Lottie into bed, Maggie allowed herself to believe that perhaps they had found, if not the future she had journeyed west for, at least one they could build from scratch. Each day settled into a rhythm. Mornings were spent organizing the Mercantile's accounts while Lottie attended the one-room schoolhouse. Afternoons found Maggie helping customers, learning the inventory, and assisting Samuel Graves with ordering supplies for the approaching winter. The old merchant proved to be a fair employer and increasingly a friend. He took a grandfatherly interest in Lottie, slipping her peppermint sticks when he thought Maggie wasn't looking, and patiently answering her endless questions about Silverdale's history. It was Graves who suggested, after observing Maggie's neat stitches as she mended Lottie's pinafore one evening after closing, that she might offer alterations and mending to augment her income. "Emma Jenkins does the fancy dressmaking," he explained, "but she's backed up for months with orders. Folks need everyday mending and alterations too." Soon, Maggie's evenings were filled with hemming trousers, letting out waistbands and patching, the rough canvas work clothes of miners. Each coin earned was carefully saved in a tin beneath a loose floorboard, security against whatever the future might hold. But while their practical needs were being met, Maggie couldn't help noticing the empty spaces in their lives. They had shelter, food, and work, but not belonging, not yet. In church on Sundays, they sat in the back pew, receiving nods of recognition, but few genuine welcomes. At school events, other mothers chatted comfortably among themselves, while Maggie stood slightly apart, included but not integrated. And in the quiet of night, after Lottie was asleep, Maggie sometimes allowed herself to acknowledge the deeper loneliness, the absence of companionship, of shared burdens, of touch. She had not come west seeking romance like some young girl, with fanciful notions. She had sought partnership, stability, a fresh start. Finding work had provided two of those things, but there remained a hollow space where partnership should be. It was on one such evening, nearly a month after their arrival in Silverdale, that the bell above the mercantile door jangled unexpectedly. Maggie had been working late on the accounts, Lottie already tucked into bed upstairs, Samuel Graves gone home to his modest house at the edge of town. She looked up, startled, to find a man filling the doorway, tall and powerfully built, with shoulders broadened by years of physical labor. For a moment, she feared it might be Franklin Turner, returned for some unknown reason. But as he stepped into the lamplight, she saw a different face altogether, weathered by sun and wind, framed by dark hair and beard streaked with silver, dominated by eyes the color of the Montana sky at dusk. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice deep and slightly rough, as if unused to much conversation. "I know you're closed, but my wagon threw a wheel just outside town. I need candles and matches. It'll be dark before I can get it fixed." Maggie hesitated only briefly before setting aside her ledger. "Of course," she said, rising from her desk. "We can help with that." The man stepped fully into the store, removing his hat to reveal more of that silver-streaked dark hair. Up close, she could see the fine lines etched around his eyes, the slight furrow between his brows that spoke of habitual concentration. His clothes were clean but worn, the practical garb of a working man, not the show of prosperity that Franklin Turner had cultivated. "Edward Harrington," he said by way of introduction. "Most folks call me Ned." "Margaret Collins," she replied, moving toward the shelf where candles were kept. "How many will you need?" "4 should do," he answered, following her at a respectful distance. "And a box of matches." As Maggie gathered the items, she became acutely aware of his presence. Solid, steady, filling the store with a kind of quiet gravity. She was accustomed to men of business, like her late husband and Franklin. Turner men whose power came from money and position. This man's strength seemed more elemental, rooted in the land and in his own hands. "You're new to Silverdale," he observed. Not a question, but a statement as she wrapped the candles in brown paper. "Yes," Maggie acknowledged, tying the package, "with twine. My daughter and I arrived about a month ago." Something flickered across his face, recognition perhaps. "From back east, Boston," she confirmed, knowing what would come next, the inevitable connection to Franklin Turner, the sidelong glance of pity or curiosity. But Ned Harrington merely nodded, reaching into his pocket for payment. "Boston's a long way from Montana Territory." "Yes," Maggie agreed, grateful for his restraint. "It is." Their transaction complete, he should have turned to go. Instead, he stood for a moment, hat in hand, studying her with those twilight blue eyes. "Your wagon wheel," she began, feeling oddly flustered under his steady gaze. "I'm the blacksmith," he said simply. "I'll manage." Of course he was. Those hands, those shoulders, they bore the marks of forge and anvil. "Well, good evening then, Mr. Harrington," Maggie said, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the empty store, the late hour. Ned, he corrected, settling his hat back on his head. Thank you for the candles, Mrs. Collins. The door closed behind him with a gentle jingle of the bell, leaving Maggie standing in the pool of lamplight, an unexpected flutter in her chest that she quickly dismissed as the lingering nerves of an interrupted evening. The next morning brought an unusual sight. To Silverdale's main street, Ned Harrington's wagon parked in front of the mercantile, its wheel apparently repaired. Inside the store, Maggie found the blacksmith in conversation with Samuel Graves, their heads bent over something on the counter. "Ah, Mrs. Collins," Graves greeted her. "Mr. Harrington here was just showing me his handiwork. Quite remarkable, don't you think?" On the counter lay what appeared to be a small metal tree, delicately crafted from iron, its branches curving gracefully, tiny leaves hammered into remarkable detail. It was both practical and beautiful, a display stand for necklaces or ribbons. "It's exquisite," Maggie said honestly, running a finger along one of the slender branches. "You made this, Mr. Harrington." The blacksmith shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just something I've been working on. Thought the mercantile might be able to use it." His eyes met hers briefly before returning to the metal. "Tree, or sell it?" Samuel Graves chuckled. "Oh, we'll sell it right enough. There's more to that forge of yours than horseshoes and wagon repairs, it seems." He named a price that raised Maggie's eyebrows. It was generous, more than generous for such a piece. "That's too much," Ned protested, but Graves waved away his objection. "I know what the ladies of Silverdale will pay for something this fine." The merchant insisted. "You bring me more pieces like this and we'll both profit." After Ned departed, Maggie found herself returning to the metal tree throughout the morning, admiring the way the lamplight played across its surface, highlighting the care that had gone into each detail. "Wouldn't have taken him for an artist," Samuel Graves commented, catching her examining the piece yet again. "Man of few words, our Ned Harrington. Been here in Silverdale almost 15 years, but I'd wager most folks don't know much more about him than the fact that he's the best. Blacksmith in 3 counties. He's not from here originally?" Maggie asked, trying to sound merely conversational. Graves shook his head. "Came from back east, somewhere after the war. Pennsylvania, maybe. Never speaks of it." He adjusted his spectacles thoughtfully. "Lost his wife and infant son to fever not long after arriving. Fever nearly took him too, but he pulled through." The old merchant sighed. "Some say it might have been kinder if he hadn't. Man's been alone ever since, pouring himself into that forge, like he's trying to burn away memory itself." Maggie felt a pang of empathy. She understood loss, understood the way it hollowed you out, leaving spaces that nothing seemed to fill. And she understood the solace of work, of exhausting yourself so thoroughly that sleep came without dreams. "Anyway," Graves continued, brightening, "he's the best craftsman for 100 miles. Never overcharges, never cuts corners. If Ned Harrington shoes your horse or fixes your wagon, you can be certain it's done right." The conversation moved on to the day's business, but Maggie found her thoughts returning to the blacksmith with the artist's hands and the eyes that held so much unspoken history. That afternoon brought Lottie home from school, bubbling with excitement. "Mama, we're having a harvest festival next week. There'll be a dance and games and pie contests." Maggie smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm. After the disappointments of recent months, Lottie's resilience remained a constant wonder. "That sounds wonderful, darling." "Miss Thompson says all the students need to participate," Lottie continued breathlessly. "I'm going to recite a poem, and there's going to be a decoration committee, and she said I could help." As Lottie chattered on about the festival, Maggie found herself wondering if she had anything suitable to wear. Her good dresses had long since been sold or altered for everyday use. Perhaps she could refresh her navy blue dress with a new collar fashioned from scraps she'd saved. "Mr. Harrington came to fix the school bell today," Lottie added, pulling Maggie from her reverie. "He's very tall, isn't he? And he doesn't smile much, but he let me pump the bellows in his portable forge, and he showed me how the metal turns colors when it gets hot enough." "Did he now?" Maggie said, surprised that the taciturn blacksmith had taken time with a child. Lottie nodded vigorously. "He said I had a good steady hand for the bellows, and he fixed Timmy Peterson's lunch pail too. The handle broke clean off and Mr. Harrington just whoosh." She made a dramatic gesture, fixed it right up like magic. That evening, as Maggie worked on a mending pile that seemed to grow no matter how many hours she devoted to it, a knock at the door to their rooms above the mercantile startled her. She opened it to find Benjamin Cooper, Samuel Graves's young clerk, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Begging your pardon, Mrs. Collins," he said, hat clutched in his hands. "There's someone asking for you downstairs. Says it's about a repair job, but Mr. Graves has gone home for the night." Puzzled, Maggie followed Benjamin down the back stairs to the store. There, standing amid the barrels and shelves, was Victoria Pendleton, her fashionable dress rustling. With each impatient movement, "Mrs. Collins," she said, her tone making the name sound like an offense, "I require your assistance with a repair. I'm told you've been taking in mending." Maggie straightened her shoulders. "Yes, I have. What needs fixing?" Victoria produced a delicate lace shawl from her reticule. "This was my mother's. It has several small tears that need attention." Her eyes swept over Maggie's simple dress. "I'm told you have a fine hand with needle and thread, though I find that somewhat difficult to believe given—" She let the sentence trail off, her meaning clear enough. Maggie accepted the shawl, examining it carefully. The lace was indeed fine, probably European, and the tears, while noticeable, were repairable with patience and skill. "I can mend this," she said evenly. "It will take time to do properly." "I need it by Saturday," Victoria announced. "I'm hosting a dinner party for certain prominent citizens of Silverdale." The emphasis on certain made it clear that Maggie was not among that number and never would be. "Saturday may not be possible," Maggie began. "I'll pay double your usual rate," Victoria interrupted impatiently. "Triple if necessary. The dinner is important." The need in Maggie's mind was immediate. Triple her usual rate would mean extra money for Lottie's winter boots, perhaps even enough left over for material for a new dress for the Harvest Festival. Pride warred with practicality, and practicality won. "I'll have it ready by Saturday afternoon," she agreed. Victoria smiled thinly. "See that you do. It's important to make a good impression on the right people." She adjusted her gloves. "Mr. Turner will be attending, of course. He's finally agreed to view my collections of European art." The barb was deliberate, aimed with precision to wound. Maggie merely nodded, refusing to give Victoria the satisfaction of a reaction. "Good evening, Mrs. Pendleton," she said coolly. "I'll see you Saturday." After Victoria departed, Benjamin Cooper let out a low whistle. "Begging your pardon, Mrs. Collins, but that woman's got a tongue sharp enough to cut leather." Maggie smiled despite herself. "Indeed she does, Benjamin." "Ben, ma'am," he corrected with a shy grin. "Only my ma calls me Benjamin, and that's when I'm in trouble." "Ben, then," Maggie agreed, turning the delicate shawl over in her hands. This would require her finest needlework, her most careful attention. "Thank you for coming to get me." The young clerk nodded, then hesitated as if wanting to say more. "Mrs. Collins," he finally ventured, "don't let folks like her get under your skin. When my family first came here from Pennsylvania, people looked down on us too. Pa was a coal miner back home, came here hoping for silver but ended up working as a teamster. Wasn't considered good enough for the likes of the Pendletons." He straightened his thin shoulders. "But we're still here, and people came around eventually. They will for you too. With that simple encouragement, the young man departed, leaving Maggie to ponder how appearances could be deceiving. Benjamin Cooper, with his gangly limbs and perpetually dusty apron, possessed a wisdom and kindness that many of Silverdale's better citizens could learn from. She climbed back up to their rooms, shawl in hand, to find Lottie already in her nightgown, carefully practicing her poem for the harvest festival. "The frost is on the pumpkin, and the fodder's in the shock," the girl recited earnestly, then frowned. "What's fodder, Mama?" "Feed for animals," Maggie explained, setting the shawl aside to help her daughter into bed, "like hay or cornstalks." "Oh," Lottie nodded, satisfied with the explanation. "Do you think people will like my poem?" Maggie smoothed the copper curls away from her daughter's forehead. "They'll love it, because you'll recite it beautifully." She tucked the quilt around Lottie's shoulders. "Now sleep, my love. School tomorrow." Later, as Maggie sat by the small window of their sitting room, she carefully examined Victoria Pendleton's shawl under the lamplight. The lace was even finer than she'd initially thought. Brussels work, if she wasn't mistaken, with a delicate floral pattern that would require the steadiest of hands to repair without leaving visible evidence of mending. As she gathered her finest needles and thread, Maggie found her thoughts drifting to Ned Harrington, to the careful artistry of his metal tree, the gentle patience he'd shown Lottie at the school. There was a story there, buried beneath the layers of silence and solitude. A man who could create such beauty from unyielding iron must possess depths unseen by most of Silverdale. Outside, the Montana night pressed against the window, vast and star-filled. Somewhere in that darkness was the blacksmith's forge, perhaps still glowing with embers as its master worked late into the night, hammering shape and purpose into formless metal, much as Maggie herself was attempting to forge a new life from the raw materials of disappointment and hope. With a small smile, she bent to her work, needle flashing in the lamplight, repairing what was broken one careful stitch at a time. The week leading up to the harvest festival transformed Silverdale. Garlands of autumn leaves and golden wheat. Sheaves adorned the storefronts, while pumpkins and gourds clustered on porches and windowsills. The town square, normally just a dusty open space with a few benches, now boasted a platform for musicians, tables for the baking competition, and strands of colored lanterns waiting to be lit at dusk. Maggie worked late into each night on Victoria, Pendleton's shawl, her fingers growing stiff and eyes burning from the strain of such detailed work by lamplight. The lace was even more delicate than she had initially thought, requiring the finest of needles and thread nearly invisible to the naked eye. Still, the challenge was welcome. Such work required complete concentration, leaving no room for worrying about their precarious position in Silverdale society or the emptiness that sometimes engulfed her when Lottie was asleep. Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear. Maggie had completed the final repairs to the shawl just after midnight, and now she carefully pressed it with a warm iron, the repaired tears virtually invisible even to her trained eye. She wrapped it in clean muslin and set it aside for Victoria's collection that afternoon, feeling a quiet satisfaction in work well done. "Can we go to the square early, Mama?" Lottie asked over breakfast, practically vibrating with excitement. "I want to see them setting everything up." "As soon as Mrs. Pendleton collects her shawl," Maggie promised, unable to resist her daughter's enthusiasm. "And after you've practiced your poem one more time. The frost is on the pumpkin and the fodder's in the shock," Lottie began immediately, her clear voice filling their small rooms with the familiar verses. Samuel Graves had given Maggie the afternoon off, insisting that the festival was not to be missed, especially for newcomers. "Best way to become part of Silverdale," he'd told her with a wink. "Nothing brings folks together like good food, music, and a bit of friendly competition." The bell at the bottom of their stairs jangled just before noon. Maggie smoothed her hair, checked that her collar was straight, and went down to meet Victoria Pendleton. The woman arrived like a visiting dignitary, dressed in a walking suit of deep burgundy, trimmed with velvet, her hair arranged in an elaborate style that must have taken her maid an hour to complete. She surveyed the mercantile with barely concealed disdain before her gaze settled on Maggie. "I trust you've completed the repairs?" she asked without preamble. "Yes, Mrs. Pendleton," Maggie replied, retrieving the wrapped shawl from behind the counter. "Would you like to examine it?" Victoria took the package and unwrapped it with meticulous care. Her eyebrows rose slightly as she held the shawl up to the light, turning it this way and that, searching for evidence of mending. Finding none, her mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. "It appears satisfactory," she conceded, sounding faintly. Disappointed not to find fault, she rewrapped the shawl and named a sum that was indeed triple Maggie's usual rate. "That's more than we agreed upon," Maggie said, startled. Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Consider it an investment. I may have more work for you in the future." She counted out the money precisely. "Your skills are surprising, given your circumstances." "Thank you," Maggie replied simply, refusing to rise to the bait. Victoria hesitated, as if debating whether to say more. Finally, with an adjustment of her gloves, she said, "You should know that Mr. Turner inquired about your welfare when last we spoke." Maggie's heart gave an unexpected lurch. "Did he?" "Yes." Victoria's smile grew sharper. "I assured him. You'd found a position suited to your station. He seemed relieved to know you hadn't been reduced to taking in laundry." With that parting barb, she swept out of the store, the bell jangling in her wake. Maggie stood for a moment, absorbing the sting. Then she looked down at the money in her hand. Enough for Lottie's winter boots, and perhaps even material for a new dress for each of them. Victoria's condescension was a small price to pay for such security. "Mama, can we go now?" Lottie called, from the top of the stairs, already wearing her best pinafore over her faded blue dress. "Yes, darling," Maggie called back, tucking the money into her pocket. "Let's go see the festival." The town square hummed with activity, farmers arranging produce displays, women setting out pies and cakes on the judging table, men testing the sturdiness of the newly constructed platform. Children darted between the preparations, their excitement palpable in the crisp autumn air. Lottie immediately spotted her schoolmates and, with Maggie's permission, ran to join them near the apple-bobbing barrels. Maggie watched her go, heart swelling at the sight of her daughter's copper curls bouncing as she ran, her laughter carrying across the square. "She's settled in well," a deep voice observed from beside her. Maggie turned to find Ned Harrington standing a respectful distance away, his massive frame somehow less intimidating in the daylight among the festival preparations. He wore a clean shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with the small burns and scars of his trade. "Yes," Maggie agreed, watching as Lottie and several other children practiced their poems together, giggling when one boy dramatically clutched his heart during a particularly romantic verse. "Children adapt more easily than adults, I think." Ned nodded, his gaze following hers to the group of children. "She did well with the bellows the other day, got a steady hand and a quick mind." "She mentioned that," Maggie said, surprised and pleased by the compliment. "She was quite impressed by your forge." A slight smile crossed Ned's face, softening the weathered lines. "Not many folks take an interest in blacksmithing these days, especially young ladies." "Lottie's curious about everything," Maggie said. Her father was the same way, always wanting to understand how things worked, what made them tick. The mention of her late husband slipped out before she could consider it, and Maggie felt a flush rise to her cheeks. Speaking of James still felt like exposing a tender wound, even 3 years after his death. If Ned noticed her discomfort, he gave no sign. "Good quality in a person," he said simply. "Curiosity." His gaze shifted to the platform where men were setting up instruments. "Will you be attending the dance tonight?" The question caught Maggie off guard. "I hadn't given it much thought," she admitted. In truth, she had been so focused on establishing themselves in Silverdale, on stretching every penny and finding work, that the idea of something as frivolous as dancing hadn't even occurred to her. Ned glanced at her, then back at the platform. "Town tradition," he said. "Everyone attends. Good way to—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "To be part of things." Before Maggie could respond, Samuel Graves appeared, balancing 3 cups of cider. "Ah, Mrs. Collins, and Ned, thought you two might enjoy some of Widow Malone's special brew." He handed them each a steaming cup. "Best cider in the territory. Though don't tell her I said so. Woman's got enough admirers without my encouragement." The warm cider was indeed exceptional, spiced with cinnamon and cloves, with an underlying sweetness that hinted at a splash of something stronger than apples. "Thank you, Mr. Graves," Maggie said, gratefully wrapping her fingers around the warm cup. "Samuel," he corrected with a wink. "We're not in the store now, my dear." As they sipped their cider, Reverend Thompson climbed onto the platform to address the gathering crowd. A tall man with a flowing white beard and kind eyes, he spread his arms in welcome. "Friends and neighbors," he called, his resonant voice carrying across the square, "we gather today to celebrate God's bounty and the fruits of our labor. This land may demand much from us, but it gives back in equal measure to those willing to work with faith and perseverance." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "As we enjoy the festivities today," the Reverend continued, "let us remember those who are no longer with us, those who helped build Silverdale from wilderness into community." He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "And let us welcome those who have more recently joined our fellowship, bringing new gifts and perspectives to share." Maggie felt several glances turn her way, some curious, others appraising, a few openly welcoming. Samuel Graves gave her shoulder a gentle pat. "That means you, my dear," he whispered. The day unfolded in a tapestry of sights, sounds, and flavors. Lottie's recitation went beautifully, her clear voice carrying across the hushed crowd, bringing a glow of maternal pride to Maggie's cheeks. There were games of skill and chance, horseshoes and ring tosses, sack races for the children, a nail driving, a contest that had the miners competing fiercely against the ranch hands. To Maggie's surprise, Ned Harrington won the nail driving contest handily, his powerful blows driving the nail into the wood with a precision that left other competitors shaking their heads in grudging admiration. The blacksmith accepted the small prize, a bottle of Kentucky bourbon, with a nod and stepped back into the crowd, uncomfortable with the attention. As afternoon mellowed toward evening, lanterns were lit around the square, casting a golden glow over the gathering. Tables groaned under the weight of food brought by nearly every household. Roasted meats, savory pies, vegetables prepared a dozen different ways, and desserts of every description. Maggie, having little to contribute to such abundance, had baked a batch of molasses cookies from her mother's recipe, using ingredients borrowed against her next week's wages. To her relief, the cookies disappeared quickly, with several people asking for the recipe. "Best molasses cookies I've had since leaving Vermont," declared Mrs. Thompson, the Reverend's wife. "You must share your secret, Mrs. Collins." "Just my mother's recipe," Maggie replied, warmed by the genuine compliment. "I'd be happy to write it out for you." As dusk deepened into evening, The musicians took their places on the platform. A fiddler, a man with a guitar, another with a harmonica, and a fourth with a small concertina. They struck up a lively tune, and couples began forming lines for a Virginia reel. Maggie stood to the side, watching as the dance began. Lottie had been invited to join a group of children playing tag around the perimeter of the square, their shrieks of laughter punctuating the music. Samuel Graves was partnered with Widow Malone, a plump, rosy-cheeked woman whose eyes sparkled with mischief as they moved through the steps of the dance. "Mrs. Collins," a voice said at her elbow. "Would you care to dance?" Maggie turned, expecting to see Ben Cooper or perhaps one of the other young men from the Mercantile. Instead, she found Ned Harrington, hat in hand, the lantern light catching the silver in his dark hair. For a moment she couldn't speak, caught off guard by the invitation. It had been years since she'd danced, not since James had been alive. And well, when they would occasionally attend concerts and balls in Boston. I'm afraid I'm rather out of practice," she said finally. Ned's expression remained steady, neither pushing nor retreating. "As am I," he admitted. "But I recall the steps, if you're willing." Something in his quiet dignity, in the simple offer with no expectations attached, made Maggie nod. "Yes," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington." "Ned," he reminded her as they moved toward the dancers. They joined the line as the next dance was forming. Maggie felt acutely self-conscious in her simple dress among women in their festival finery. But as the music began and she took her place opposite Ned in the line of dancers, such concerns faded. The steps came back to her body more readily than she would have expected, muscle memory guiding her through turns and promenades. Ned proved to be a surprisingly graceful dancer for such a large man. His movements were precise and controlled, his hands steady when it briefly clasped hers during the figures of the dance. There was no conversation. The music and the caller made that impossible, but something passed between them nevertheless. A shared moment of simple human connection, a brief respite from the solitude that seemed to envelop them both in different ways. When the dance ended, Maggie was breathless, her cheeks flushed with exertion and unexpected pleasure. Before she could thank Ned, another dance was called, and to her surprise, Ben Cooper appeared at her side, requesting the honor. One dance led to another, and Maggie found herself passed from partner to partner as the evening progressed. Samuel Graves, Reverend Thompson, even the station master whose name she couldn't recall. It was during a brief respite, as she stood, fanning herself with her handkerchief, that Maggie noticed Victoria Pendleton across the square, resplendent in a gown of deep emerald silk. Beside her stood Franklin Turner, immaculate as ever in a tailored suit, his expression one of polite interest, as Victoria gestured animatedly, clearly holding forth on some topic of great importance to her. Maggie's stomach tightened. She had known Turner would be at the festival, of course. He was too prominent a citizen to be absent from such a gathering. But seeing him here, so composed and unaffected, brought a rush of complicated emotions. Embarrassment at her rejection, anger at his dismissal of Lottie, relief that she had escaped a life of walking on eggshells around his precise expectations. As if sensing her gaze, Turner looked up. Their eyes met across the lantern-lit square, and for a moment, something like regret flickered across his face. Then Victoria reclaimed his attention, her hand possessively touching his arm, and the moment passed. "Mama!" Lottie appeared at Maggie's side, her face glowing with excitement, hair escaping its ribbons in wild tendrils. "Did you see me dancing? Billy Martin asked me to dance the polka, and I remembered all the steps you taught me." Maggie turned gratefully to her daughter, pushing thoughts of Franklin Turner firmly aside. "I did see, darling. You were the most graceful dancer on the floor." "Are you having fun, Mama?" Lottie asked, her green eyes searching Maggie's face with that uncanny perception that sometimes made her seem far older than her 10 years. "Yes," Maggie said, realizing with some surprise that it was true. Despite the moment of discomfort at seeing Turner, despite the lingering awareness of their precarious position in Silverdale, she had enjoyed the day more than any in recent memory. "Yes, I am having fun," Lottie beamed. "Good, you should have fun sometimes." She tugged at Maggie's hand. "Come see the wishing tree. Everyone's tying ribbons to it with wishes for the coming year." Maggie allowed herself to be led to the edge of the square where an old oak tree had been decorated with dozens of colorful ribbons, each tied to a branch, fluttering in the evening breeze like prayer flags. "Miss Thompson says it's a tradition from the old country," Lottie explained, selecting a blue ribbon from a basket at the tree's base. "You whisper your wish to the ribbon, then tie it on a branch. When winter comes and the ribbon freezes, your wish freezes too, and then in spring, when everything thaws, your wish melts into the ground and grows." "That's lovely," Maggie said, touched by the simple poetry of the tradition. Lottie held the ribbon to her lips, whispered something Maggie couldn't hear, then stretched on tiptoe to tie it to a low-hanging branch. "Your turn, Mama." Maggie selected a ribbon, soft lavender, the color James had always said matched her eyes, and held it for a moment, considering. What did she wish for? Security, acceptance, love. All seemed both too simple and too complex for this charming ritual. Finally, she whispered to the ribbon, "Belonging." Then she tied it alongside Lottie's, the two ribbons tangling slightly in the breeze, lavender and blue dancing together. As they turned from the tree, Maggie nearly collided with someone standing just behind them. She looked up to apologize and found herself face to face with Ned Harrington. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Ned," she corrected herself. "I didn't see you there." "My fault," he said quietly. "Shouldn't have been standing so close." He nodded toward the tree. "Nice tradition." "Do you have a wish, Mr. Harrington?" Lottie asked boldly. Something shifted in the blacksmith's expression, a softening around the eyes, a hint of a smile at the corners of his mouth. "Reckon I might," he said, selecting a dark green ribbon from the basket. Maggie took Lottie's hand. "We'll give you privacy for your wish," she said, turning to go. "No need," Ned replied. Without fanfare, he leaned close to the ribbon, his lips moving silently, then reached up to tie it to a branch near theirs. The green ribbon settled alongside the lavender, and blue, the three colors complementing each other against the darkening sky. Before Maggie could comment, the musicians struck up a waltz, the first of the evening. Couples moved onto the open area serving as a dance floor, arms encircling each other for the more intimate dance. "Would you honor me?" Ned asked, the formality of the words at odds with his rough-hewn appearance. Maggie hesitated. A waltz was different from the line dances, more personal, more revealing in its closeness, yet something in Ned's steady gaze, in the quiet dignity with which he held himself, made refusal seem impossible. "I'd be pleased to," she said finally. Lottie grinned at them both. "I'm going to watch the pie judging," she announced, darting away before Maggie could protest. Ned offered his arm, and Maggie placed her hand lightly upon it as they walked to the dance floor. His arm was solid beneath her fingers, the muscle firm even through the fabric of his shirt. When they reached the edge of the dancers, he turned to face her, one hand extending to rest at her waist, the other clasping her right hand gently. Maggie had danced the waltz many times in her younger days, but nothing had prepared her for the peculiar intimacy of this moment. The warm pressure of Ned's hand at her waist, the surprising grace with which he guided her into the first steps of the dance. He moved with confidence, leading firmly but without force, his eyes never leaving her face. "You dance well," she said, searching for something to fill the silence between them. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Had a good teacher," My mother insisted all her sons learn properly. Said a man who could dance would never lack for friends. Your mother was wise, Maggie replied, surprised by this glimpse into his past. Do you have many brothers? Had 3, Ned said, smoothly guiding her through a turn. All gone now. 2 in the war, 1 to fever after. I'm sorry, Maggie said softly, understanding all too well the weight of such loss. Ned nodded once, accepting her sympathy without comment. They danced in silence for several measures, the music wrapping around them, the other couples a blur of movement and color at the edges of Maggie's awareness. Your daughter, Ned said finally. She has your spirit, strong, adaptable. Maggie smiled, warmed by the observation. She's had to be. We both have. Boston's a long way from Montana territory, Ned observed, echoing his comment from their first meeting in the Mercantile. Yes, Maggie agreed, though sometimes it feels like another lifetime entirely. Loss can do that, Ned said quietly. Split your life into before and after. The simple statement, delivered without pity or judgment, struck Maggie with unexpected force. He understood, this silent blacksmith with his artist's hands and watchful eyes. He understood what it meant to rebuild after devastation. The music swelled toward its conclusion, and Ned guided her through the final turns of the waltz, his movements sure despite his earlier claim of being out of practice. As the last notes faded, they stood for a moment, still in the closed position. Of the dance, something unspoken passing between them. Then, with impeccable courtesy, Ned stepped back, releasing her hand but holding her gaze. Thank you for the dance, Mrs. Collins. Maggie, she said impulsively, if I'm to call you Ned, you should call me Maggie. He inclined his head slightly. Maggie, then. A commotion near the refreshment tables drew their attention. The pie judging had concluded, and Widow Malone was accepting a blue ribbon for her huckleberry creation, amid good-natured cheers and a few mock groans from competitors. I should find Lottie, Maggie said, suddenly aware of how long they had been conversing. It's getting late. Of course, Ned agreed. I'll walk you back to the Mercantile if you'd like. Streets can be busy after the festival. The offer was practical, without presumption, and Maggie found herself nodding gratefully. Thank you. Let me collect Lottie, and we'll be ready to go. She found her daughter among a group of children gathered around the wishing tree, adding more ribbons to its already festooned branches. Lottie came willingly enough when called, her eyes heavy with the particular exhaustion of a child who has experienced too much excitement in one day. Did you see the pies, Mama? She asked through a yawn as they made their way back to Ned. Mrs. Malone won, but Miss Thompson said next year I'm old enough to enter the children's baking contest. We'll have to practice our pie crust then, Maggie replied, smoothing Lottie's wayward curls. Ned waited patiently at the edge of the square, standing slightly apart from the ongoing festivities, a solitary figure despite the crowds. When he saw them approaching, he straightened from where he'd been leaning against a hitching post. Ready? He asked simply. The walk back to the Mercantile was peaceful, the night air cool after the warmth of the crowded square. Lottie, tired, but still bubbling with impressions from the day, chattered about the festival, the games, the food, the music. Ned listened attentively, occasionally offering a comment or asking a question that delighted the girl with its seriousness. And did you see Mr. Cooper dancing with Lizzie Jenkins? Lottie asked, her tone suggesting this was a matter of great importance. Timmy says Ben's sweet on her. I didn't notice, Maggie admitted, smiling at her daughter's observant nature. Young Cooper could do worse, Ned remarked. Miss Jenkins is a hard worker, doesn't put on airs like some in town. Lottie nodded solemnly. That's what Timmy's ma says too, that she's not fancy, but she's good-hearted. They reached the side entrance to the Mercantile that led up to Maggie and Lottie's rooms. Maggie fumbled in her reticule for the key, suddenly awkward with the impending farewell. "Thank you for walking us home," she said, finding the key at last, "and for the dance." Ned removed his hat, holding it before him. "My pleasure." He looked down at Lottie, who was swaying slightly with fatigue. "You did well with your poem today, Miss Lottie. Clear voice, good diction." Lottie beamed at the praise. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington, and thank you for showing me your forge the other day." "Any time," he replied, the hint of a smile softening his weathered features. "Shop's always open to those with curious minds." Maggie unlocked the door, ushering Lottie inside. "Good night then, Ned." "Good night, Maggie," he replied, settling his hat back on his head. He waited until they were safely inside before turning away, his tall figure soon swallowed by the shadows of Silverdale's main street. Upstairs, as Maggie helped Lottie prepare for bed, her daughter's sleepy voice broke the comfortable silence. "I like Mr. Harrington, Mama. He doesn't talk much, but he listens really well." "Yes," Maggie agreed, brushing out Lottie's tangled curls. "He does seem to be a good listener." "And he looks at you nice," Lottie added, the observation casual but pointed. "Not like Mr. Turner did. Mr. Turner looked at you like you were a horse he was thinking about buying." Maggie's hands stilled in Lottie's hair, startled by the astute comparison. "That's an interesting observation, darling." "It's true, though," Lottie insisted through another yawn. "Mr. Turner looked at you like he was checking if your teeth were good. Mr. Harrington looks at you like you're a person he wants to know." Out of the mouths of babes, Maggie thought, resuming her brushing. "Well, Mr. Harrington is a kind man, it seems. Now into bed with you. It's been a long day." Once Lottie was tucked in, drifting quickly into the deep sleep of the thoroughly exhausted, Maggie sat by the window of their small sitting room, looking out over Silverdale's main street. A few revelers from the festival still made their way home, their voices carrying in the night air snatches of song, bursts of laughter, the low murmur of conversation. The Harvest Festival had been more than she expected. Not just an afternoon of games and food, but a chance to see Silverdale's heart, to understand its rhythms and relationships in a way that day-to-day commerce at the mercantile couldn't provide. For the first time since their arrival, Maggie felt something like hope taking root. Not the desperate, clinging hope of survival, but something steadier, more substantial. And Ned Harrington. The thought of the blacksmith brought warmth to her cheeks. His quiet strength, his careful gestures, the way he had listened to Lottie with genuine interest, all spoke of a man whose depths ran far beneath his taciturn surface. Dancing with him had felt both utterly foreign and strangely familiar, as if some part of her had recognized something in him that matched her own experience of the world. Foolishness, she chided herself. She had known the man for barely a week. Whatever connection she imagined between them was likely just the product of loneliness and the romantic atmosphere of the festival. She had come to Silverdale seeking security, not romance. Her focus needed to remain on establishing herself, and Lottie, on saving enough to weather any future storms, on becoming indispensable to Samuel Graves and his mercantile. And yet, as she prepared for bed, Maggie found herself remembering the feel of Ned's hand at her waist, the surprising grace of his movements, the way his eyes had held hers during their dance. Most of all, she remembered Lottie's observation. "He looks at you like you're a person he wants to know." Such a simple thing, to be seen as a person worth knowing. Yet in that moment, it felt like the rarest gift of all. The weeks following the Harvest Festival brought the first whispers of winter to Silverdale. Morning frost painted the boardwalk silver, while the distant mountains wore fresh caps of snow that crept lower with each passing day. The miners hurried to extract final loads of ore before the deep freeze, and farmers brought in the last of their crops, working from dawn until dusk against the approaching cold. In the mercantile, business flourished as townspeople stocked up on supplies. Samuel Graves kept Maggie busy ordering additional inventory, tracking shipments, and maintaining the meticulous accounts that had become her responsibility. The mending. Work continued as well, with even Victoria Pendleton sending more items for repair, always delivered by her maid, never by the woman herself. One crisp November morning, as Maggie arranged a new display of winter boots, the door opened with its familiar jingle. She looked up, prepared to greet a customer, and was surprised to find Ned Harrington standing just inside the entrance, his tall frame seeming too large for the confines of the mercantile. In his hands, he held a small wooden box, finely crafted, with dovetail joints and a polished surface that caught the light. "Good morning, Ned," she said, smoothing her apron. They had seen each other occasionally since the festival. Brief encounters on the street, nods across the church before Sunday service, once a short conversation when Lottie had insisted on stopping by the blacksmith shop to show Ned a drawing she'd made of his forge. But there had been no private conversations, no moments like the dance they had shared. "Maggie," he greeted her with a slight inclination of his head. "Thought you might be able to use this." He held out the wooden box. Curious, Maggie accepted it, noticing immediately the quality of the workmanship. The wood had been sanded too. Satin smoothness, the corners perfectly joined, the lid hinged with small brass fittings that gleamed like gold. "It's beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the surface. "Did you make this?" Ned nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable with the question. "Woodworking's a hobby, for winter evenings mostly, when the forge is banked." Maggie opened the lid to reveal a velvet-lined interior divided into small compartments, each perfectly sized to hold spools of thread, thimbles, needles, and other sewing notions. "A sewing box," she breathed, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Oh, Ned, it's perfect." "Noticed your mending work's been increasing," he said, his gruff voice softening slightly. "Thought proper tools should be properly stored." Before Maggie could respond, the back door of the mercantile opened, and Samuel Graves emerged from his office, spectacles perched on the end of his nose. "Ah, Ned. Good, you're here." The old merchant approached, carrying a sheet of paper. "Just received word from Helena that special order of iron stock you requested will be delayed by at least 2 weeks. Snow in the pass, apparently." Ned's expression didn't change, but Maggie noticed a slight tightening around his eyes. "Need that stock for the miller's new cook stove. Winter's coming fast." Samuel nodded sympathetically. I know. I've asked them to send it by the northern route if necessary, even if it costs extra." He glanced at the wooden box in Maggie's hands. "Ah, I see you've delivered your masterpiece. What do you think, Mrs. Collins? Isn't our blacksmith a man of hidden talents?" Maggie smiled, clutching the box carefully. "It's extraordinary workmanship. I've never owned anything so fine for my sewing things." Ned shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. "Just a practical object." "Nonsense," Samuel countered cheerfully. "I've seen furniture in fancy Denver houses not half so well made." He turned to Maggie, eyes twinkling behind his spectacles. "Ned here does more than hammer horseshoes, you. No, finest metalwork in the territory, but his woodworking's equally impressive. Made the new pulpit for the church last year. Carved panels that look like they belong in a cathedral." Ned cleared his throat. "Need to get back to the forge. Miller boy's waiting on some hinges." He nodded to them both, his eyes lingering briefly on Maggie's face. "Glad you like the box." After he departed, Samuel chuckled softly. "Man of few words, our Ned, but his actions speak volumes, wouldn't you say?" Maggie felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "He's very kind." Samuel's eyes grew thoughtful. "Known Ned Harrington 15 years. Can count on one hand the number of gifts I've seen him make for anyone." He adjusted his spectacles with a knowing smile. "Best get back to those boots. Shipment of ladies' galoshes coming in on tomorrow's stage." That evening, after Lottie was asleep, Maggie sat at their small table, transferring her sewing supplies into the beautiful box. Each needle and spool found a perfect home in the compartments Ned had crafted. The simple act of organizing her tools brought a surprising contentment, as if the box itself represented a kind of order she had been seeking since James's death, a place for everything in its place. Her thoughts kept returning to Ned's face as he'd presented the gift, the quiet pride beneath his stoic expression, the flash of pleasure when she'd admired his work. In Boston, she had known many accomplished men, doctors, lawyers, professors who had frequented her husband's accounting practice, men of education and refinement who could discuss literature or politics with easy confidence. Ned Harrington possessed a different kind of mastery, one of hands and fire, of metal coaxed into submission, of wood shaped by patient skill. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. Puzzled, few people visited at this hour, Maggie crossed to the door, automatically checking that her collar was straight and her hair tidy. Dorothy Wilson stood on the landing, a shawl wrapped tightly around her angular shoulders against the evening chill. "Evening, Margaret," she said briskly. "Got a moment?" "Of course." Maggie stepped back, inviting her in. "Is everything all right?" Dorothy entered, her sharp gaze taking in the neat rooms, the sewing box open on the table, Lottie's schoolbook stacked beside it. "Just fine. Doing my rounds, checking on folks before the first big snow comes." She unwrapped her shawl, draping it over the back of a chair. "Weather-wise men are saying it'll be a hard winter. Thought I'd see if you and the girl are prepared." Touched by the older woman's concern, Maggie gestured for her to sit. "We're managing well. Mr. Graves has been very generous with our arrangements, and the mending work brings in extra." Dorothy nodded, settling into the chair. "Samuel Graves is a good man. Town's lucky to have him." She glanced at the sewing box. "That's new. Fine piece of work." "A gift," Maggie said, unable to keep a small smile from her lips. "From Ned Harrington." And Dorothy's eyebrows rose, her expression shifting from surprise to something more calculating. "Is that so? Well, well." She studied Maggie with renewed interest. "Ned Harrington doesn't give gifts lightly, or at all, generally speaking." "So I've been told," Maggie replied, pouring them each a cup of tea from the pot still warming on the stove. Dorothy accepted the tea, blowing across its surface before taking a careful sip. "Known Ned since he first came to Silverdale. After the war it was. Broken man in those days. Wife and baby both gone to fever, him nearly dead himself." She shook her head, the memory clearly still vivid. "Wasn't sure he'd make it that first year. Hardly spoke. Just worked that forge from dawn to dusk like he was trying to burn something out of himself with each strike of the hammer." Maggie sat opposite her, cradling her own teacup. "That must have been terribly difficult for him. Nearly killed him," Dorothy confirmed bluntly. "If it hadn't been for the Abbott boy, might have succeeded too." "The Abbott boy?" Dorothy nodded, settling into her story. "Tommy Abbott. 9 years old, fascinated by the forge. Started hanging around, watching Ned work. Don't think Ned even noticed him at first, too lost in his own grief. But Tommy was persistent, kept coming back, asking questions, sweeping up at the end of the day." She sipped her tea, eyes distant with memory. "Then one day, Tommy didn't show up. Turned out he'd fallen through river ice, caught a lung fever. Ned heard about it and something just shifted in him. Started checking on the boy daily, made him a special bell so he could ring for his mama when he needed something. When Tommy couldn't sleep for coughing, Ned would sit with him, tell him stories about the properties of different metals, how to judge the right heat by color. Did the boy recover?" Maggie asked, caught up in the story. "He did. Grew up strong too, works for the railroad now, over in Dakota Territory. Dorothy set her cup down with a decisive click against the saucer. After that, Ned started living again. Not fully maybe, but enough. Opened himself to the town bit by bit, though he keeps his own counsel for the most part. She fixed Maggie with a direct stare. Point is, that man understands loss, understands rebuilding from ashes, and he doesn't give gifts without meaning behind them. Maggie felt heat rise to her cheeks under Dorothy's knowing gaze. We're just friendly acquaintances. Dorothy snorted softly. If you say so. She rewrapped her shawl, preparing to leave. Just came to make sure you'll weather the winter all right. Looks like you will. At the door she paused. One more thing, town council's planning a Christmas pageant. Need someone to manage the costumes. Your sewing skills could be put to good use. I'd be happy to help, Maggie said. Dorothy nodded, satisfied. Good. Committee meets Thursday evenings at the church. With that, she departed, leaving Maggie with much to consider besides costume designs. The first significant snowfall arrived 3 days later, transforming Silverdale overnight. Maggie woke to find the world outside their window blanketed in white, the familiar building softened by rounded drifts, icicles hanging like crystal decorations from eaves and awnings. Lottie was enchanted, pressing her nose to the cold glass, her breath fogging the view. Can we go out in it, Mama? Please? After school, Maggie promised, buttoning her daughter into her warmest coat, wrapping a scarf snugly around her neck. And only if the snow stops falling by then. The snow continued all day, however, thick flakes swirling past the mercantile windows, accumulating in doorways faster than shopkeepers could shovel them clear. By noon, Samuel Graves made the decision to close early. No sense staying open, he declared, watching as Ben Cooper stoked the stove against the growing chill. Nobody's coming out in this if they don't have to. Best get home while we still can see where we're going. Bundled in every warm garment they possessed, Maggie and Lottie made their way carefully up the back stairs to their rooms, the snow already halfway to Lottie's knees. Inside, they shed wet coats and boots, and Maggie set about making a special treat of hot chocolate to mark the season's first significant snowfall. As they sat sipping from steaming mugs, a shout from the street below drew their attention. Lottie rushed to the window, wiping a clear patch in the condensation with her sleeve. Mama, come look, it's the Christmas tree. Maggie joined her, peering through the cleared spot to see a wagon making its laborious way down the street, a massive pine tree secured to its bed. Men walked alongside, steadying the tree whenever the wagon wheels slipped in the snow. At the lead was Ned Harrington, his broad shoulders dusted with white, giving directions with the calm authority of someone accustomed to managing difficult tasks. They're taking it to the town square, Lottie said excitedly. Miss Thompson told us about it. There's going to be a big celebration when they light it. They watched as the procession made its way slowly toward the square, townsfolk emerging from shops and houses to cheer its passage despite the weather. Even Victoria, Pendleton, stood on her porch, well protected by a fur-trimmed cloak, observing the spectacle with regal approval. Can we go watch them put it up? Please, Mama. Unable to resist her daughter's enthusiasm, Maggie agreed. They bundled up again and made their way carefully down to the street, joining the small crowd gathering in the square. The men had already erected the tree in a specially prepared base and were now securing it with ropes to ensure it wouldn't topple in the winter winds. Reverend Thompson directed the operation, his white beard making him look remarkably like the illustrations of St. Nicholas in Lottie's picture book. Ned worked methodically, his powerful arms managing ropes and braces that other men struggled with. When the tree was finally secured, a cheer went up from the gathered crowd. Reverend Thompson raised his hands for attention. Friends, our Christmas tree is in place. Tomorrow, weather permitting, we'll begin decorating it for the lighting. Ceremony on Sunday evening. Everyone is welcome to contribute ornaments. Homemade ones are especially appreciated. And now, let us all go home to warm hearths, with gratitude for this beautiful symbol of the season. As the crowd began to disperse, Ned noticed Maggie and Lottie standing near the edge of the square. He approached, brushing snow from his coat. "Quite an operation," Maggie said by way of greeting. "The tree is magnificent." "Found it 3 miles up Silver Creek Canyon," Ned replied. "Been watching it grow for years. Seemed the right time to bring it down before it got too big to move." Lottie, who had been bouncing with barely contained excitement, burst out, "We're going to make ornaments for it. Miss Thompson showed us how to dip pine cones in wax and attach ribbons." Ned's expression softened as he looked down at her. "That's so. Tree could use some color." "Will you come to the lighting ceremony, Mr. Harrington?" Lottie asked boldly. "Expect I will," he answered, then glanced at Maggie. "If your mother's attending." The simple statement, delivered in his straightforward manner, nevertheless carried a weight of meaning that sent warmth spreading through Maggie despite the cold. "We'll be there," she confirmed. "Good." Ned nodded, then reached into his pocket. "Almost forgot. Brought something for you, Miss Lottie." He produced a small object and handed it to her. Lottie gasped with delight. It was a tiny metal horse, no bigger than her palm, expertly crafted down to the smallest detail. Flowing mane, delicate legs, even the suggestion of a saddle on its back. "Did you make this?" she asked, turning it over in her mittened hands. "Had some scrap iron?" Ned said with a modest shrug. "Thought you might like a remembrance of your visit to the forge." "I love it!" Lottie declared, impulsively throwing her arms around his waist in a hug that clearly startled the blacksmith. After a moment's hesitation, he patted her head awkwardly, his expression a mixture of surprise and something deeper, more vulnerable. Maggie felt her throat tighten at the sight. How long had it been since this man had received a child's spontaneous affection? Since the Abbott boy, perhaps now grown and gone to Dakota territory. "Thank you, Ned," she said softly. "That was very thoughtful." He met her eyes over Lottie's copper curls, and for a moment, the square, the snow, the whole of Silverdale seemed to recede, leaving just the three of them in a private world of understanding. The spell was broken by a shout from the other side of the square. "Harrington, need your help securing this last rope." Ned stepped back, gently disengaging from Lottie's embrace. "Duty calls," he said, returning to his customary reserve. "Stay warm, both of you." They watched him stride away, his tall figure moving with purpose through the falling snow. "I really do like him, Mama," Lottie said, carefully tucking the iron horse into her coat pocket. "He doesn't talk much, but his eyes say nice things." "Yes," Maggie agreed, taking her daughter's hand for the walk back to the mercantile. "I believe they do." Over the next several days, Silverdale transformed into a Christmas wonderland. Garlands of evergreen boughs adorned storefronts. Red ribbons brightened doorways, and candles glowed in windows, their light reflected and multiplied by the snow outside. In the town square, the great pine tree gradually accumulated ornaments. Pine cones dipped in wax, paper stars, ribbons and bells, and small carved figures contributed by townsfolk. Maggie's involvement with the Christmas pageant committee brought her into regular contact with a wider circle of Silverdale residents. To her surprise, she found herself welcomed without reservation. Her suggestions for costumes met with appreciation, her skills with needle and thread admired without the undercurrent of condescension she had come to expect from Victoria Pendleton's circle. "You've got a real gift," Emma Jenkins, the dressmaker, told her as they worked together on the angel costumes. "Ever considered taking on more formal dressmaking? I'm swamped with orders these days. Could use someone with your attention to detail." The offer was unexpected but welcome. Dressmaking paid better than mending and would allow Maggie to work on her own schedule rather than being tied to the mercantile's hours. She promised to consider it, her mind already calculating how such a change might improve their circumstances. On the day of the tree lighting ceremony, Silverdale awoke to perfect winter weather, crisp, cold, and clear, with sunlight sparkling off the snow and not a cloud in the deep blue sky. The mercantile bustled with last-minute shoppers, and Maggie was kept busy all day. When closing time finally arrived, she hurried upstairs to help Lottie prepare for the evening's festivities. "Which ribbon should I wear, Mama?" Lottie asked, holding up two options for her hair, a practical brown that matched her best dress, or a festive red that Samuel Graves had given her as an early Christmas gift. "The red," Maggie decided. "It's a celebration, after all." She brushed Lottie's copper curls until they shone, then tied them back with the red ribbon, the bright color, a cheerful contrast against her daughter's hair. Her own preparations were simpler. Her navy blue dress refreshed with a new white collar she had made from scraps, her hair arranged in a neat knot at the nape of her neck. As the sun began to set, they made their way to the town square, joining the stream of townspeople converging from all directions. The great tree stood dark against the deepening twilight, waiting for its moment of glory. Around its base, the children who would perform in the pageant gathered, costumed as angels, shepherds, and wise men. Lottie, disappointed not to be among them, was nonetheless excited to watch. "There's Mr. Harrington!" she exclaimed, spotting the blacksmith standing somewhat apart from the main crowd, as was his habit. Without waiting for Maggie's response, she darted through the gathering, weaving between family groups until she reached his side. By the time Maggie caught up, Lottie was already deep in conversation with Ned, showing him the red ribbon in her hair, chattering about the pageant and the tree and her excitement for Christmas. "I'm sorry," Maggie said, slightly breathless from the pursuit. "She's very excited." Ned shook his head, dismissing the need for apology. Natural for a child at Christmas. He looked down at Lottie with a gentleness that transformed his weathered features. "Was telling Miss Lottie here that the star for the top of the tree is ready." "Did you make it, Mr. Harrington?" Lottie asked. He nodded. "Town council asked for something special this year. Should be arriving any minute now." As if on cue, a murmur ran through the crowd as Reverend Thompson emerged from the church, carrying something carefully wrapped in cloth. He made his way to the platform that had been erected beside the tree, and the townsfolk gathered closer. "Friends and neighbors," the Reverend began, his resonant voice easily carrying across the square, "we gather tonight to celebrate the season of light and hope. Our beautiful tree, generously provided by the efforts of many, stands ready to brighten our darkest nights." He gestured to the cloth-wrapped object beside him. "And thanks to the remarkable skill of our own Ned Harrington, we have a new crown. For our tree, a star to guide us through this winter and many more to come." With a flourish, he unveiled the star. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. It was exquisite. A perfect five-pointed star crafted from polished metal that gleamed like silver in the torchlight. But it was more than just a simple star. Ned had worked the metal into an intricate filigree pattern, creating a lace-like effect that would catch and reflect light from every angle. "It's beautiful," Maggie breathed, genuinely awed by the artistry. She glanced at Ned, whose expression remained impassive, save for a slight flush across his cheekbones at the public praise. "Mr. Harrington," Reverend Thompson continued, "would you do us the honor of placing your creation atop our tree?" Ned hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with being the center of attention. Then his gaze fell on Lottie, who was watching him with shining eyes, and on Maggie beside her. Something resolved in his expression. With a short nod, he stepped forward. The crowd parted to let him through. A ladder had been positioned against the tree, reaching to its uppermost branches. Reverend Thompson handed him the star with ceremonial solemnity, and Ned, cradling it carefully in one large hand, began to climb. A hush fell over the gathering as he ascended. When he reached the top, he carefully worked the star onto the uppermost branch, securing it with wire he had apparently prepared for the purpose. Satisfied with its stability, he descended to approving applause. "And now," Reverend Thompson announced, "the moment we've been waiting for. Children, are you ready?" The costumed children gathered around the tree, each holding a small candle protected by a glass chimney. At the Reverend's signal, they began to sing, a simple carol about stars and shepherds and a holy night. As they sang, they carefully lit the candles that had been placed among the tree's branches, working from the bottom upward, until the entire tree glowed with dozens of points of light. The effect was magical. The candlelight caught the ornaments, making them sparkle and dance. The star at the top, with its intricate filigree design, seemed to capture every ray of light and multiply it, sending fractured patterns across the snow-covered square like fallen stars. "Oh, Mama, it's so beautiful," Lottie whispered, her face transformed by wonder. "Yes, it is," Maggie agreed, but she wasn't looking at the tree. Her gaze had found Ned, standing now at the edge of the crowd, watching not the spectacle but her and Lottie, his expression more open than she had ever seen it, vulnerable, hopeful, yearning in a way that made her heart catch in her chest. The children's singing gave way to a community carol, with everyone joining in. Maggie sang along, the familiar words coming easily, but her awareness remained fixed on Ned's presence, on the unspoken current that seemed to flow between them, across the crowded square. When the caroling ended, Reverend Thompson offered a blessing for the season, and the formal ceremony concluded. Families began to disperse, some heading home for private celebrations, others toward the church hall where refreshments awaited. "Can we go get hot chocolate, Mama?" Lottie asked, pointing toward the hall where lanterns blazed a welcome. "Of course," Maggie agreed, but before they could move, Ned appeared beside them. "Might I have a word, Maggie?" he asked quietly. "Go ahead with the Thompsons, darling," Maggie told Lottie, nodding toward the Reverend's wife who was gathering. "A group of children. I'll join you in a moment." As Lottie skipped away, Maggie turned to Ned, suddenly aware of the rapid beating of her heart. "The star is magnificent," she said. "I've never seen anything like it." "Thank you," he replied, absently running a hand through his hair, dislodging a few snowflakes that had settled there. "Been working on it for weeks, wanted it to be right. It's perfect." He shifted his weight, uncharacteristically hesitant. "Was wondering if you and Miss Lottie might do me the honor of joining me for Christmas dinner. At my home. I'm not much of a cook, but I manage a decent roast." The invitation, so unexpected yet so hoped for, left Maggie momentarily speechless. Christmas dinner was a family affair, an intimate gathering. That Ned would open his home, his private sanctuary, to them on such a day spoke volumes about his intentions. "We would be delighted," she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt, "but only if you'll allow us to contribute to the meal. I make an excellent cranberry sauce, and Lottie has been perfecting an apple pie under Mrs. Thompson's tutelage." The relief that washed over Ned's face was almost palpable. "That would be most welcome." He hesitated, then added, "There's something else I've been meaning to ask you." "Yes?" He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. "Been thinking about the Abbott place just north of town. Tommy's parents passed last year. Property's been sitting empty. Good land, solid house. Needs some work, but nothing I couldn't manage." He met her eyes directly. "Been considering purchasing it. Would give me room for a larger workshop. Maybe a garden come spring." Maggie's breath caught as she understood the deeper question beneath his words. "It sounds like a wonderful opportunity," she said carefully. "House is too big for one person," Ned continued, his gaze steady on hers. "Has 3 bedrooms. One would make a fine space for a young lady who likes to read and ask questions about how things work. Tears pricked at Maggie's eyes, unexpected and unwelcome in the cold air. "Ned." "I'm not a man of fancy words, Maggie," he said quietly. "Never have been. But I know what it means to lose everything and have to rebuild. Know what it means to find unexpected hope when you thought all was ashes." He reached out, hesitated, then gently took her gloved hand in his. "Not asking for an answer tonight, just asking you to consider the possibility, for you and Lottie both." Maggie looked up at him. This man of few words and deep feeling, who crafted beauty from unyielding metal, who had offered Lottie the simple gift of taking her seriously, who looked at Maggie herself with eyes that saw beyond the worn clothes and practical exterior to the woman still alive beneath the weight of widowhood and struggle. "I will consider it," she promised, her voice soft but certain. "Very carefully." His hand tightened briefly around hers before releasing it. "That's all I ask for now." He glanced toward the church hall. "Should join Miss Lottie before she drinks all the hot chocolate in Silverdale." They walked together across the square, their steps leaving paired tracks in the fresh snow. Above them, Ned's star caught the moonlight, sending fractured patterns across the white ground. Like possibilities, Maggie thought. Like promises waiting to be fulfilled. In the church hall, they found Lottie holding court among a group of children, proudly showing them the iron horse Ned had made for her. When she spotted them entering together, her face lit up with a smile of such uncomplicated happiness that Maggie felt her heart expand to contain it. "Mama, Mr. Harrington, come see the Christmas cookies Mrs. Thompson made. They're shaped like stars, just like the one on the tree." As they moved toward the refreshment table, Maggie became aware of the glances being cast their way. Dorothy, Wilson's knowing smile, Samuel Graves's approving nod, even Victoria Pendleton's barely concealed surprise. In a town like Silverdale, where everyone's business was common knowledge, their entrance together would not go unremarked. Yet for the first time since arriving in Montana territory, Maggie found she didn't mind being the subject of speculation. Let them talk. Let them wonder. The path ahead, whether it led to the Abbott place or somewhere else entirely, would be determined by her choice, her decision based on what was best for her and Lottie. But as she watched Ned bend down to examine a child's drawing, his large, hands gentle, his attention complete and serious, Maggie felt the future opening before her like a book whose pages were yet to be written. Not the future she had imagined when boarding that stagecoach months ago, not the security she had sought in Franklin Turner's precise handwriting, but something altogether different. Something built, perhaps, like Ned's star, from fragments of broken dreams forged in the fire of loss, hammered with patience and skill into a new pattern that could catch the light and reflect it back 1,000-fold. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft flakes drifting past the windows, adding fresh layers to the world. Inside, surrounded by the warmth of community, the promise of belonging, and the unexpected gift of a second chance, Maggie Collins felt, for the first time in years, truly home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.